Welcome to Harrowing Tales, where the most chilling stories await you. Tonight, I'll guide you through a tale that might just linger in your mind long after the lights go out. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share where you're watching from and the time. It's always darkest before dawn, isn't it? Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's step into the shadows together. The reflection. Sarah moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town in the dead of winter. She wanted peace and quiet after a bitter divorce, a chance to start over. The house, with its tall windows, creaky wooden floors, and antique charm, felt like the perfect place to heal. One thing about the house unnerved her, though: the mirror. It hung in the dining room, a massive oval framed in ornate, tarnished gold. It wasn't something she would have chosen, but the previous owners had left it behind. Its surface seemed unusually clear, reflecting every detail of the room with almost unsettling precision. At first, Sarah ignored it. She focused on unpacking, organizing her life, and finding small joys in her solitude. But it wasn't long before the mirror started catching her attention. One evening, while sipping tea at the dining table, she glanced at her reflection. Her own face stared back, tired but peaceful. Then, for just a moment, she thought she saw movement. Something shifted in the corner of the mirror, where the frame's gold edges blurred into shadows. Sarah turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. Nothing. The room was empty. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. "It's just your imagination," she muttered, forcing a laugh. But the feeling lingered. A week passed, and the strange incidents began to escalate. Sarah noticed things in the mirror that didn't exist in the room. A shadow in the corner where no furniture stood. A faint outline of a figure standing behind her, only to vanish when she turned around. She started to avoid the dining room entirely, eating her meals in the kitchen instead. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to remove the mirror. Something about it felt important, as if moving it might make things worse. One night, a heavy snowstorm rolled in, blanketing the town in white. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the power flickered out just after midnight. Alone in the silent darkness, Sarah lit candles and wrapped herself in a blanket. As she passed the dining room on her way upstairs, she froze. The mirror. Even in the faint glow of the candlelight, the surface seemed to shimmer unnaturally, like rippling water. She hesitated, then stepped closer. For the first time, the reflection didn't match the room. The dining table in the mirror was set with an elaborate feast: roast turkey, candied yams, and gleaming silverware. The chairs, empty in reality, were filled with shadowy figures. Their faces were indistinct, but their eyes glowed faintly, fixed directly on her. Sarah gasped, stumbling back. The candle flickered, threatening to go out. In the mirror, one of the figures slowly rose from its chair. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't real." But it felt real. The figure stepped closer, its form becoming clearer. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face pale and expressionless. He raised a hand, pointing directly at Sarah. The lights in the house flickered back on. The dining room was empty. The next morning, Sarah decided to research the house's history. She spent hours at the library, poring over old newspapers and records. What she found chilled her to the core. In the late 1800s, the house had belonged to a wealthy family named the Whitmores. During a winter dinner party, a fire broke out in the dining room. The guests were trapped, and every one of them perished. The mirror, it turned out, had been a wedding gift to Mrs. Whitmore. It was one of the few items that survived the fire. Sarah returned home, her hands shaking. She tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew better. That night, she dreamt of the dining room. Of fire and smoke. Of figures screaming and clawing at the walls. When she woke, she could still hear their cries echoing in her ears. The final straw came a week later. Sarah was brushing her teeth, preparing for bed, when she heard a faint noise from downstairs. A low, rhythmic tapping. She froze, her toothbrush still in hand. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the dining room. She crept down the stairs, her heart pounding. As she approached the room, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the mirror. The surface was no longer clear. It rippled like liquid, and faint shapes moved within. Sarah stepped closer, unable to look away. Suddenly, a hand burst through the glass, pale and clawed, grasping at the air. Sarah screamed, stumbling back. The hand retreated, but the surface of the mirror didn't return to normal. Faces pressed against it now, their features twisted in anguish. They mouthed silent words, their expressions pleading. "Help us," she thought she heard them whisper. Terrified, Sarah grabbed a sheet from the couch and threw it over the mirror, blocking it from view. The next day, she sold the house. She didn't care about the loss of money or the questions from the realtor. She packed her things and left, vowing never to return. As she drove away, she glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw the faint outline of a face staring back at her. It was pale, expressionless, and it was smiling. Late at night, when Sarah tries to forget the house and its horrors, she sometimes feels the urge to look in a mirror. She doesn't. But she can still feel their eyes watching her, waiting for her to return.